I say this because he conceptualized the construction of the ABC Highway, the major thoroughfare in Barbados today. He initiated the development of the international business sector, the #2 foreign exchange earning sector in Barbados for the last several years. He was the architect behind the Plantation Tenantries Freehold Purchase Act. That has enabled thousands of Barbadians to purchase land and build their own homes. He was responsible for the establishment of the National Drug Service, which ensured that Barbadians of all ages could get medication free or at minimal cost. He was the driving force behind the establishment and promotion of the credit union movement, which has helped thousands of Barbadians to own homes, land, vehicles, and to start businesses. He was the catalyst for women's upward mobility in society and the removal of the concept of illegitimacy, which gave legal rights of inheritance to thousands of children born out of wedlock. And he pushed for the establishment of the National Cultural Foundation, which is at the center of Barbados' cultural and artistic renaissance. The Honorable Mayor Motley, Leader of the Opposition, the Right Honorable Owen Arthur, former Prime Minister, current and former parliamentarians, members of the Diplomatic Corps, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good evening to you all. I stand before you this evening with the temerity to deliver the lecture, Intellect, Vision and Fortitude in an Island State, the Tom Adams Story. Tonight, I will share with you my perspective of the impact which John Michael Jeffrey Manningham Tom Adams had on the development of Barbados and the development of its people. Although his widow Genevieve and his sons are overseas, she's given me her blessings for this evening's presentation. As I do this, I am particularly grateful to the Honorable Cynthia Ford, the current MP for St. Thomas, and her team for entrusting me with such an important task. Cynthia, as she likes to be called, served as Tom's branch president and in diverse other roles for many years in St. Thomas. And her stellar representation of that parish is testimony to Tom's insight in supporting her from an early age. It is entirely due to the devotion and diligence of Cynthia and those who comprise the Tom Adams Memorial Committee that most people recall the name of Tom Adams at all. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a blight on our politics and democracy and the greatest absurdity in our history that the work and worth of Tom Adams has been lost to the murky machinations of political forces. Let us not make any bones about it. There is enough blame to go around. The Barbados Labour Party cannot be absolved from this. It is the most singular discredit to our matchless legacy that we've allowed this dismissal of such a superior intellect and non-attribution of his accomplishments to take root. There must be a reversal of this travesty. Tom Adams must be accorded his rightful and magnificent place in our history. If at the end of my presentation, I'm able to stimulate interest among a generation for whom the legacy of Tom has been lost, but more importantly, cause any of our current crop of aspiring politicians to be so inspired by the life of Tom Adams to want to follow in his footsteps, I consider I would have achieved my goal this evening. Some of you are probably thinking, why is Jerome Walcott presenting this lecture? What is he doing up there? After all, I was not one of Tom Adams' contemporaries, not like those who have previously presented in this series of memorial lectures, including his son, Rawdon. I never worked with him, and I cannot speak of any serious interaction with him. However, thanks to my friend George Griffith, as a medical student, I got a chance to meet him on 2 occasions. Worry no more. Let me allow you to exhale. The answer is simple. It is about inspiration. I have been inspired by Tom Adams, the man, his style, and his unfathomable public service to his beloved Barbados. His ability to stimulate and motivate, the insightfulness and comprehensive balanced approach he brought to leadership, the visionary and futuristic concepts of his ideas, the clarity of thoughts and application of purpose, his clearly detailed preparation, and of course, his sheer intellect. Indeed, he meshed all of these characteristics to take Barbados on such an unimaginable journey in 8.5 years as Prime Minister, so that the statue and transformation of Barbados that he engineered remains the standard by which we are measured, and the engine on which Barbados still runs 30 years later, despite the war unleashed, especially in recent times, on this unshakable foundation. I am not given to hero worship, and my training as a surgeon has only exposed too often the frailties of man. Neither would I wish to trespass on what is reserved for our God. But if I had a hero, and I have said it before, that person would be Tom Adams. I consider myself fortunate to have been growing up while Tom Adams was on stage. My generation grew up in a time when political dynamism was at its peak, with probably the most formidable collection of politicians ever, with Adams and Barrow all pretty much in their prime. Amongst this exceptional group, Tom Adams was most exceptional. The magnetism of his intellect was palpable. For us, then teenage boys, and for much of Barbados too, a disproportionate amount of interest in politics in the 1970s was the result of Tom Adams' sheer fluidity with language, the likes of which Barbados has not seen before and has not seen since. Tuesdays were not for getting up to mischief at the Lodge School. It was about not missing the school bus in the evening, jumping off as soon as it approached the traffic lights in St. Michael's Row and running to the public gallery of Parliament to listen to Tom, then running home, of course, to get home at a certain time. I vividly recall standing in the pouring rain in Eagle Hall on the eve of the 1976 elections, though unable to vote, but just to hear Tom. It was mesmerizing. It was dramatic. On the Monday that he died in 1985, I was assisting in surgery, and I'm sure one or two of my colleagues are here. And I was assisting and was unable to function for the rest of that evening. Some of them laughed at me. Such was the impact that I had for this man Tom Adams had on me. Nothing was as exciting as Tom in the House of Assembly. His interventions were textbook studies in content, phrasing, and emphasis, economy of words, the motivational, and of course, the cruel put down. You listen to Tom to learn. He inspired us youngsters to go for excellence, to debate among ourselves, to be curious, and to be achievers. He was terrific at encapsulating any debate and setting that description in your mind. Note his first statement in the heralded reply to the famous 1976 budget. And I quote, "Mr. Speaker, seldom has a budget," and the reply, "been attended in this House of Assembly by so much confusion," end of quote. Or the build-up and the put-down in reference to a budget. And quote, "I have seen some tinkering with the cigarette tax. I congratulate the Prime Minister for saving the small shopkeepers in the country from having to put 5 cents or 6 cents in the tin whenever they sell a package of cigarettes. A little more foresight would have avoided this in the first place," end of quote. Or his description of the DLP as a government that came into power on a flood of euphoria and a complete absence of promise. Is this a case of déjà vu? By the way, if anyone wants a lesson in debate demolition, Tom Adams' 1976 budget reply is required reading. A reply that he was asked to give immediately after the budget had been presented by the Right Excellent Errol Barrow. His cleverness in debates has been spoken about repeatedly. Known for his respect for parliamentary rules and decorum, one admired trait was his knack for adhering to the rules while breaking them. Once asked to withdraw any reference to wickedness in a statement that he had made, "Can you believe that honorable members can be so wicked as to come into this house and to try to make the public and the House believe people are being fired?" And when asked to withdraw, Tom replied, and I quote, "I beg your pardon, sir. The honorable member for St. Lucie is not wicked. He is not vicious, and he is not a liar. And I withdraw all of those words that I have used or implied, sir." End of quote. In an aspirational society, who could not be inspired by Tom's educational and professional achievements? He was a Barbados scholar in mathematics, studied politics, philosophy, and economics at Oxford, then went on to study law at Gray's Inn. There was also the expanse of his knowledge on areas unrelated to his studies or profession, and his apparent mastery of all kinds of eclectic subjects. He was an expert philatelist, expert on world history, both ancient and modern, expert on the classics, expert on philosophy, expert on cards, expert on gardening. There's a story about a minister passionately outlining a proposal while Tom was chairing the session. He sat at the head of the table reading a Time magazine, seemingly oblivious to the points being made by the minister. After a while, the exasperated minister interrupted himself and upbraided Tom for such discourtesy. To the minister's chagrin, Tom apologized and repeated the points the minister was making, ending by asking him if he wanted to know what was in the Time magazine and telling him to. But the first lesson of the Tom Adams model is not intellect in itself, but its application to inspire and impact the society for the greater good. What comes to mind is an extract from Machiavelli in The Prince, and I quote, "There are three classes of intellects, one which comprehends by itself, another which appreciates what others comprehend, and a third which neither comprehends by itself nor by the showing of others. The first is the most excellent, the second is good, the third is useless." End of quote. Tom was a unique combination of the first two, while also exhibiting the notion that the greater intellect one has, the more originality one finds in men. In other words, excellence seeks out excellence and understands that progress is not the province of a few, but the inputs of many are necessary in making people become a part of their own narrative and in shaping policy. Tom was lauded for his predilection to canvass opinions and give his colleagues room to grow once they stayed within the confines of cabinet accountability, democratic principles, and the programs of government. No wonder then that Tom was able to lead that which is often regarded as the best political theme in Barbados' history and became known as the Great Combination. The team of Sir Henry Ford, Sir Bernard St. John, Sir Louis Tull, Dame Billy Miller, Sir Richard Cheltenham, Sir David Simmons, Lindsay Bolden, Ezra Allen, each of whom was brilliant in their own right. For a man of elevated ability, he had a knack for being nice to ordinary folk. The story of the NCC worker whom he drove to Laracoke, I believe she's in the audience, and his relation with Slims and Gearbox. Adams welcomed conversing, even getting advice from very much younger people. This tendency to recognize youthful talent and to propel the growth of individuals for the benefits of the country is best illustrated in Adams's positioning of young Owen Arthur, who later became Prime Minister. In Owen Arthur's own words, he described Tom Adams, and I quote, "He was the mastermind of my political campaign, but he also found time to be a canvasser. In his very complete way, he found time to both be my general and one of my foot soldiers." End of quote. In seeing Owen Arthur elected as member of Parliament for St. Peter in 1984 was Tom's last great political crusade. A few months later, speaking in the debate on Tom's passing, Arthur noted, and I quote, "I want to believe that everything I shall do in public life will be to the glory and the credit of the investment he has made in me. End of quote. It is fair to say Arthur, in this respect, kept his word. He has so far come closest to fulfilling the promise of the Tom Adams model, and in so doing, becoming the outstanding politician of his generation. Barbados requires this application of intellect of the Tom Adams model, rather than what has been our lot for the last 7 or so years. Intelligence without ambition is wasted. Tom Adams maximized his intellect with a soaring ambition, ingenious in its simplicity, to make Barbados the best small island state in the world. This was wrapped in a vision so far-sighted that in many respects, we still have not come to grips with the component of that visualization, aspects that are still to be realized and or completed. The vision to pole vault Barbados to a place unknown was grounded in certain fundamentals. The practice of democratic socialism with a fully pragmatic twist, firm management of the economy to avoid unsustainable fiscal deficits and borrowing for non-productive purposes, development and investment for the common and universal good. The great success of Tom Adams's vision is even more astonishing when not only the time span is factored in, but more so the distance from where he and his administration had to come. By 1976, Barbados had gone through about 4 years of economic turmoil, stemming from the 1973 oil crisis and the encompassing recessionary period that followed. Socially, the country entered a phase of high unemployment, which ballooned upwards of 24% by 1975. Economically, Barbados' gross domestic product fell drastically between 1973 and 1976, while the debt skyrocketed to more than double since 1971 to over 200 million, and the influx of foreign investment had quickly nosedived. With very high inflation rates hovering around 100% in the 4 years of 1972 to 1976, and a staggering cost of living increase of 127% between 1971 and 1976. The population began to question the promise of Barbados' post-independence development. Politically, the Democratic Labour Party became dim in the eyes of the polity by the time the 1976 general elections came around. The public had soured on a litany of shadowy gambits, including International Seafoods Limited, Carib West Airways, the purchase of Bath Plantation, and the North Point, a ship that could not sail, all of which Tom later described as an equation of financial disgrace. The DLP also displayed high arrogance at the depths of despair in the oil crisis by rolling out the privileged pump, which catered only to DLP members and cronies. And the right excellent error bar led the denigration of members of the public in the kind of shocking language that was unheard of, such as crabs in a barrel, army of occupation, and the suggestion that people should be put in a barrel of oil, set alight, and put out to sea. Tom himself was the focus of vituperative attacks. In fact, one of the DLP campaign slogans was, "Can you trust Tom Adams?" Any of this sounds familiar? Going where angels fear to tread, Adams, in the foreword of the BLP's 1976 manifesto, pledged to bring new ideas, bold initiatives, and fresh thinking about our national problems. He was being modest. Polish philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer wrote, and I quote, "Talent hits a target no one else has seen, can hit. Genius hits a target no one else can see." He probably had Tom Adams in mind. The vision was not merely to redress the major issues of socio-economic depression and mayhem left by the Democratic Labour Party. Adams's ambition was the wholesale transplantation of Barbadians to a new state of mind and a way of life, and Barbados from a country marking time with a colonial-type model to being exceptional. By 1985, Tom's work was spectacularly successful. I could end this part of the presentation now with these 3 statements. He had a comprehensive blueprint for the development of Barbados and Barbadians. Every component of Barbados was transformed by the vision of Tom Adams. Indeed, the revolution was so complete that today almost every aspect of life that we enjoy is due to the realization of the Tom Adams' vision. It is summed up in the BLP's motto, a better life for our people. Starting with the abolishment of the then onerous 5% sales tax, Tom Adams embarked on a path not traveled, in which he said the answers are to be found in the formulas of better management and improving confidence. He fashioned an advanced approach to economic management that utilized tax breaks to spur investment and build social capital, moving from taxes as an annual budgetary punishment to taxation as a tool for prosperity and what he described as putting money in people's pockets. From the man, Tom, of whom it was said, and I quote, his vast knowledge of the structure and functioning of economics was perhaps the largest knowledge available to this country possessed by one person, end of quote. From him came the international financial services sector, and this remains a significant pillar of the Barbados economy, second only to tourism in contributing to the GDP. In fact, it was then that the novel concept of a services economy based around tourism and financial services was born. This thrust took place notwithstanding the fact that sugar production and food crop output reached new heights. That period was also characterized by bold forays in developmental economics, fully understanding the role government must play to stimulate progress. This resulted, among others, in the creation of the Barbados Development Bank, the Insurance Corporation of Barbados, the Barbados National Bank, the Arawak Cement Plant, Haywards Hotel, the Central Bank, and of course the promotion of the credit union movement as an indigenous alternative to the banking sector. The legacy of these institutional initiatives was wealth-creating opportunities for thousands of average Barbadians, which led to more of them than ever before owning small businesses. Perhaps more relatable is Tom's foresight in creating the infrastructure without which transportation in Barbados would be unimaginable. The Spring Garden Highway, the ABC Highway, the Northern Access Road, and plans laid for the Highway 2A, Warrens as a town centre with commercial and manufacturing activities, a redeveloped Bridgetown Port, and the new Grantley Adams International Airport. An elderly resident of Jackson described Warrens as being cane fields and rock before the construction of the highway. Tom thought that it was essential to have a direct link between our air and seaports. He felt that along this highway, manufacturing and commercial activities would spring up. He conceptualized a four-lane highway, hence the necessary land acquisitions were made in the 1980s and therefore were not required when the country finally got around to making a section of it 4 lanes 30 years later. It was estimated to cost $30 million at that time. To make it a complete 4-lane highway today would cost 6 or 7 times as much. This was vision. Reflect on the fact, too, that 30 years ago, Tom Adams, the visionary, was not only speaking of 4-lane highways, but of the impending computer revolution. He stated emphatically in 1985 that in a few years, computers would replace typewriters on desks in every office. This was remarkable at the time. That time, the average Barbadian had only heard of this new machine called a computer, had never seen it, and hardly knew anything about it. Another visionary idea was his thoughts on alternative energy. We are now wrapped up in these discussions about a green economy and renewable energy. But 30 years ago, Tom Adams was promoting the use of solar energy, and tax incentives were introduced by him to encourage persons to install solar heaters as he promoted the benefits of a solar industry in Barbados. Still visionary, in education, there was the New Education Act of 1981, a very much expanded school building program with 6,000 new places for primary school children, removal of the restriction that led to 14-year-olds having their education automatically terminated, and the awarding of a special scholarship to spur an interest in foreign languages. This move recognized the importance of Barbados needing more of its people trained and equipped to take advantage of the opportunities in the offshore and tourism sectors. And I believe we are still hearing about this. Government housing programs were massive. Developments included Watton, Kensington Lodge, Ferniehurst, Haynesville, Oxnards, and Rosemount. Together with the private sector, an average of 1,200 homes were built annually. The sites and services programs, which facilitated the Barbadian culture of purchasing land and gradually building a house, was introduced. And in another radical move, residents were relocated en masse from the poverty of Springhead to the modernity of electricity, roads, and pipe water in Sand Hill. Anyone here from White Hill must be apoplectic. Mindful of time constraints, you can mull over this list at your leisure. All the brainchild of Tom Adams: the National Petroleum Corporation, the Export Promotion Corporation, the Unemployment Benefit Scheme, the National Training Board, the National Sports Council, the New Bridgetown Fisheries Complex, and the new General Post Office. During Tom's tenure, Parliament was truly a place for the people's business, an engine for growth with prodigious output of complex legislation relating to governance, social programs, business development, and new ventures. Included here were the passage of the Family Law Act, Property Act, Ombudsman Act, Companies Act, Immigration Act, and Administrative Justice Act. Ladies and gentlemen, to cover the benefits to Barbados of the spectrum of Tom's achievements can and should be dealt with in a series of lectures. They cannot be dealt with adequately in one lecture. Time constraints or not, however, we must pause for some reference to 5 seminal ones which focus on the development of people. This is important because Tom not only visualized the development of the economy, but the enfranchisement of the Barbadian society as well. Each measure shows Tom to be far more multidimensional than just the political and economic guru of his time, and reflects an unchanging component of his philosophy that, in the words of Thomas Jefferson, and I quote, "The care of human life and happiness is the first and only object of good government," end of quote. The work of the Adams administration on the status of women, leading to the establishment of the Bureau of Women's Affairs, was the catalyst for the women of Barbados to take their rightful place in society in every sphere alongside men. The benefits of the removal of the concept of illegitimacy through the Status Restrictions Reform Act will endure as long as there is a Barbados. The establishment of the Barbados National Drug Service fundamentally changed the lives of thousands of Barbadians, reinforcing one of the basic provisions of government, the health of its citizens. This was revolutionary in this region, and it is one that should never be sullied. The creation of the National Cultural Foundation, recognizing the importance of cultural identity to a young post-colonial population, and the need for appropriate cultural activities to be organized, supported, and sustained. Hence NIFCA and an enhanced crop-over festival with emphasis on developing the local calypso art form. Coupled with this was the commissioning of the Emancipation Statue, a symbol of freedom from the shackles of our history of slavery. This was aimed at instilling in Barbadians a sense of identity. Ironically, Tom was preparing a major speech for the unveiling of this statue when he passed, some 6 days before the planned ceremony. It is, however, noteworthy that his foresight for such potent symbols was continued by the Arthur administration, and that is why today all of the major national statues in Barbados were commissioned and erected under the Barbados Labour Party. By far the greatest of these measures championed by Tom was the Tenantries Freehold Purchase Act of 1980. This act completed the total emancipation of the Barbadian society by empowering thousands of working-class Barbadians to own property and enjoy the modern amenities that were mushrooming across the island. Almost 8,000 individuals were the immediate beneficiaries of this legislation. the core of which was that land occupied for generations on plantations could be acquired for 10 cents. 10 cents a square foot, a price governed by consideration of public policy. It also provided for tenants to acquire the land they were working, with the Adams administration providing services, including surveying and conveyancing under the Tenantries Development Act. While 300 years after slavery, the call for reparations continued, Tom Adams institutionalized Barbados' own reparation to its people in 1980. It is impossible to capture the freedom from the dehumanizing aspects of the plantation system. But the social and economic transformation of the Tenantries Act is there for all to see and in motion to this very day. It is doubtful that in the annals of the history of Barbados, whether any initiative will be as encompassing of the scale or as uplifting of the spirit as the social and economic revolution of the Tenantries Act. On that alone, Tom Adams is incomparable. These days we hear about building a society, yet this was exactly what he and the Barbados Labour Party were doing 30 years ago. But true greatness is never a result of chance occurrence or a one-time effort or achievement. It requires a multitude of correct decisions for the everyday choices between putting the country in reverse or progressing. If Barbadians came to know firsthand the depth of his great brain between 1976 and 1985, the resoluteness which Tom Adams brought to the nation in spearheading national development was nothing short of phenomenal. It was a time requiring the greatest fortitude. Leaders led, and Tom Adams led from the front. He communicated consistently with the people and readily took responsibility. There was a resolve to hold together the Barbados Labour Party after the devastating loss of 1971, and at the age of 40, to persevere against attempts to remove him from the leadership of the party. Of course, this is the realm of party politics. There was a resolve demonstrated in directing 2 by-elections and a general election in 1 year, all of which he won. There was a resolve demonstrated in disbanding the sales tax immediately on assuming office in the midst of perilous government finances. There was a resolve shown in appointing Sir Harcourt Lewis, then the treasurer of the Democratic Labour Party, to be the manager of the new Barbados National Bank in the face of criticism from some of his colleagues. And there was certainly the resolve in standing firm even against his cabinet colleagues on matters such as the construction of the ABC Highway. From all reports, it was a difficult time in cabinet. Of course, there was massive criticism from the opposition Democratic Labour Party, with charges that it was unnecessary and would only serve for the landing of Gandra planes. Indeed, the Right Excellent Errol Barrow posited that he would never drive on it. However, his name is now attached to it. There was a resolve against the pushback of many policies by the Democratic Labour Party, ably supported by sections of the media. You would not believe that the opposition led the charge against the introduction of the Tenantries Freehold Purchase Act. However, they later voted in favor of it. And there was a resolve to take Barbados into an IMF standby arrangement program on Barbados' terms and successfully overcoming the economic hiccups which prompted it. All of these domestic challenges paled into insignificance to the fortitude required of the leader as a number of catastrophic occurrences with international consequences called for quick and decisive action. As Sir Louis Tull said, and I quote, "Before the team could warm their seats in cabinet," end of quote, a Cubana airline crashed off the west coast of Barbados in one of the most devastating acts of terrorism involving the bombing of an airline in the Western Hemisphere up to this day. The monument at Prospect in St. James is in memory of that, for those of you who are not perhaps familiar. With the then Cold War still in full effect, the dynamics of power relations between the US and its allies, and Russia and theirs, of which Cuba, 90 miles off Miami, was one. The crush had the potential to put Barbados in a cauldron in which it would be cooked. Tom Adams's perspicacity allowed him to navigate this minefield such that Barbados remained an ally of the U.S. and developed strong relations with Cuba. There were invasion threats from the likes of Sidney Bernard Alleyne. There was the issue of the Harp gun, another calamity of international proportions involving South African connections in a time of apartheid and Israeli intelligence. For reference, you can Google Dr. Jerry Bull and read of his fate allegedly at the hands of the Mossad. Tom Adams handled these with the aplomb of a man who was not the prime minister of a small, insignificant country, but a leader in the developed world, and maybe even one of the war generals he loved to read about. And just when one thought his testicular fortitude was beyond question, he was further challenged to an extreme, initially by a bloody coup in Grenada when Maurice Bishop and his New Jewel movement seized power in 1979, and then in 1983 when that communist government imploded with mass executions. Against considerable odds, Tom Adams forged an alliance with first then Prime Minister of Dominica, Dame Eugenia Charles, and then other regional colleagues to spearhead a US-led intervention. Fortunately, in that regard, Tom had the foresight to have established the Barbados Defense Force in 1979, in spite of tremendous criticism, which also participated in that action. The circumstances of Caribbean politics and lives might have been so very different without the tenacity of Tom to take a stand for democracy in this region. Tom's resolve extended to foreign policy, in which, despite the East-West divide, by 1977, he'd established diplomatic relations with countries in communist Europe. Not because he was pro-socialist, but because Barbados was looking for cheaper sources of imports, for technical assistance, and hoped it could attract East European tourists. Clearly, the new direction for Barbados' foreign relations was tied to its economic realities. Pragmatism was the only ism Tom was interested in. An unrepentant regionalist, Tom also recognized the potential of a unified and prosperous Caribbean, and more critically, the benefits for regional people. Speaking at the 5th meeting of the Conference of the Heads of Government of the Caribbean Community in Nassau, the Bahamas in July 1984, Tom Adams insisted that among the Caribbean territories, and I quote, renewed fragmentation should be anathema, end of quote. He suggested that insularity characterized by increasing fractures would, and I quote again, run counter to our efforts at strengthening our external role and promoting our political standing, but it could even make it more difficult for us individually to satisfy the reasonable needs and aspirations of the people we represent. So where does this leave us? Unmistakably, the Tom Adams model calls for fortitude, the courage to make decisions in the interests of the citizen. As part of the propensity for reinvention, we have moved from proactive leadership to adaptive leadership. Do not be surprised if sometime soon you do not see or hear being trumpeted the benefits of leadership of silence. Luckily, we already know the benefits of this. What is leadership if it is not proactive and adaptive? Barbados will do well to look to the Tom Adams model to recapture what it is like to lead. Tom Adams's phenomenal accomplishments were entrenched in a short 8.5 years. It was an enormous amount of work. The lesson for us is that geniuses also work. Indeed, there's a body of work that suggests you only become great by constantly honing your skills. Barbados has been described as being in a state of inertia. When we look around, we see evidence of laziness and complacency. No society that chooses laziness, excuses, procrastination, and complaining can survive. We must show up for work, whether it is at Parliament or dealing with files. Barbados can only move forward if, from the top to the bottom, we show up for work and work. We agree that the uniqueness of Tom Adams will probably not be replicated anytime soon. But a large measure of that uniqueness was the fact that not only did he do great things, but he did small things in a great way. Yes, there was the extraordinary and the remarkable and the unusual. But Tom Adams also excelled in what is called secondary greatness, the issues of real life, those things in a country that are relevant, in fact necessary, for the common and universal good and the day-to-day living of the people. Can you imagine a Tom Adams administration glibly presiding over the severest water problems for almost 2 years? The least we can expect from our leaders is to deal with the issues of real life, provide at the very least the 5 basic components for which government exists: to provide shelter, to provide health care, to provide education, to provide sanitation, and to provide transportation. Tom's indubitable political skills and economic prowess became profound and life-changing because he understood that people must be at the center of the development initiatives and that there must be excellence in delivering the most basic services. Interestingly, this very point, that development must be built on people's needs and aspirations, was only made recently by the CARICOM Secretary General when speaking on the 2016 UNDP, launch of the UNDP Human Development Report. That prioritizing informs why the initiatives of Tom Adams remain so sweeping and indelible even now. In coming years, a new set of challenges will present themselves. Government will have to deal with what The Economist magazine calls the post-truth politics in the age of social media. There will be the challenge of communicating with and regulating the Snapchat generation, e-government and governance. There will be the challenge of relationship between private provision and public service, between accountability and transparency. This 50th anniversary finds us very much, ironically, in need of a future. I am suggesting that it is imperative that we reach back and learn from the man Tom Adams and his time. Barbados needs the Tom Adams model, a Tom Adams approach, a Tom Adams vision, a Tom Adams decisiveness, a Tom Adams actualization of the dreams of a nation. I suspect that regardless of the challenges, we will be equipped to deal with them if we are informed by the Tom Adams model. He is matchless as the preeminent and most transformative leader in the last 50 years in this country. So why is John Michael Jeffrey Manningham Tom Adams not among the pantheon of national heroes of Barbados? You should ponder. Given all that he achieved in 8.5 years, can you imagine if we had Tom Adams at this juncture of our history? Just imagine. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and good evening.